She was ridiculed, discredited, but now new evidence has emerged, and maybe the world laughed too soon. Imagine an hourglass, one of those old ones, with thick glass and fine sand. The sand flows slowly, steadily, as if each grain carries the weight of time, but suddenly a crack appears. It makes no sound, it draws no attention, but it's there, growing, fracturing what once seemed solid. That's exactly what happened when Julia Wendell came forward saying, "I am Madeleine McCann." The world didn't believe her. She was called an opportunist, a fraud, a lunatic. The reaction was swift, almost automatic, as if everyone had already decided what was true and what was madness. But now something has changed. New evidence has surfaced. Data no one expected started to leak, like the sand in that hourglass, slipping through the cracks that most prefer to ignore. And maybe the world laughed too soon. Julia isn't just a confused young woman seeking attention. She carries within her a void where a childhood should be. No photos, no clear memories, no consistent documents. She also carries the weight of being rejected before she could even tell her story. No one wanted to listen. No one even wanted to ask. The Madeleine case became a symbol of collective pain, but at the same time, it became untouchable, closed, filed away, treated as an old wound no one wants to reopen. When Julia appeared, she poked at that wound, and the world responded with scorn. But what if, deep down, the rejection of Julia isn't about her, but about the fear of facing what might be hidden behind the sand that's already slipped away? This video won't tell you what to believe, but it will lay out the latest evidence, the most uncomfortable coincidences, and the questions no one had the courage to ask, because the time for certainty is over. Now is the time for nagging doubt, for cracked silence, for what leaks through the gaps. If this touches you, if you also feel that the hourglass is about to turn, then stay with me. Because the next piece of this story might just be the one that makes everything, absolutely everything, change. Oh, and if you're one of those people who believes that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, needs to be heard, subscribe to this channel. Because today we don't look away, we turn the hourglass. In 2007, the face of a 3-year-old girl was plastered across newspapers, TVs, and websites worldwide. Madeleine McCann vanished from a room in Portugal while sleeping with her siblings. Since then, everything has been said, everything has been tried, everything has supposedly been exhausted. To the public eye, the case became branded as unsolvable, a looping pain that never closes. With every new documentary, every loose lead, every pointed suspect, the same ending: silence. It was in this context that Julia Wendell appeared. Out of nowhere, a young Polish woman with a face marked by doubt and halting speech said, "I think I'm Madeleine McCann." The world, already tired of false leads, laughed quickly, impatiently, with contempt. Before any evidence could surface, she was called an opportunist, crazy, a delinquent chasing fame. And it didn't matter that she shared details about her lost childhood, with no photos, no documents, no clear story. The doors slammed shut too fast. And here comes the question no one likes to ask. Why did we laugh so easily? Are we too comfortable with the version we were given? Or does facing a new possibility reopen wounds we'd rather keep buried? Because if it's true, if for a second there's a chance this girl is who she claims to be, the story changes completely. And that's terrifying. As the weeks passed, Julia kept insisting. She showed marks on her body, similarities in her eyes, and a void in her childhood that didn't seem fabricated. Her mother refused to talk about the past. No clear birth certificate, no baby photos, no medical history. She said, "I always felt like something didn't fit. I was always treated like a strange burden in my home." The media's response? Jokes, mocking headlines, aggressive comments online. But something many didn't see, or pretended not to, was the partial DNA test she managed to get, which revealed an unusual detail. Julia has British ancestry, with a degree of genetic compatibility that, for some experts, demands more questions. Not fewer. It doesn't prove anything on its own, but it can't be dismissed either. This is where the conflict stops being about Julia and starts being about our own resistance. Karl Popper said a theory is only valid if it can be falsified. That is, if it can be tested. But when Julia appeared, most had already decided she was false before checking anything. We live in a time when the risk of being wrong is scarier than the desire to seek the truth. Ulrich Beck called this the risk society. We'd rather protect what we already know than face an uncomfortable symbol. She's not just a young woman saying something strange. She's a reminder that maybe we haven't closed this case, that maybe what bothers us most is reopening something we thought was settled. Because if she's wrong, everything goes back to square one. But if she's right, well, then the world will have to deal with a truth it lets slip right before its eyes. Up to this point, Julia Wendell had already been dismissed as just another person trying to latch onto a famous case. But it was at this moment, amid the noise, that something shifted. When the partial result of a genetic test showed a 69.23% compatibility with the genetic profile of Jerry McCann, Madeleine's biological father, the world didn't know how to react. The number doesn't confirm, but it doesn't rule out either. And that in itself should have been enough to reopen the conversation. The news landed like a spark where no one expected fire. Suddenly, journalists who had laughed started asking questions again. Psychologists began revisiting their analyses. And Julia, she cried, "I don't want money, I just want to know who I am." The sentence was spoken softly in a shaky video posted online, but it carried an almost unbearable weight, because it wasn't just a young Polish woman talking about identity, it was the mirror of a global pain, one no one had resolved, a truth that, for so long, most pretended to accept. With the DNA result in hand, Julia started getting more attention, but also more attacks. They said she was manipulating, that the data was inconclusive, that it was all coincidence. But that's the problem. Too many coincidences and too few questions. How do you explain the coloboma in her right eye? A rare, almost unique defect that Madeleine also had. And the moles on her left leg in the same pattern? And the fragmented memories that, though vague, seem to point to the same place? Are they just echoes of a confused mind? Or signs no one had the courage to connect? By now, the doubt was bigger than the laughter. And what started as mockery began turning into silence. The kind of silence that weighs, that unsettles. That makes you think, what if? Julia had another gap no one could explain. The first years of her childhood. No photos, no report cards, no clear medical records before age 5. She said, "I'd ask, and I always got the same answer. You were very sick. We don't have anything recorded." But the more she spoke, the stranger it got. Her biological family, who should have been the first to seek the truth, refused deeper tests, shut the doors, denied, vanished. And then another detail came to light. Julia was briefly arrested for stalking, obsessive behavior, according to the records. But when you look closer, what they called obsession might have just been desperation. A repeated cry from someone drowning, not knowing which way to swim. The truth can leave marks we don't know how to name. And sometimes trying to understand your own past looks more like madness than accepting it as a blank. Descartes said the only thing we can accept as true is what can be clearly proven. But what happens when we don't have proof? Just gaps, just broken memories, too many coincidences, and too few answers. This is where everything turns. Because we're not just talking about Julia anymore. We're talking about our reaction as a society. The way we deny new truths to protect old ones. The way we treat those who challenge what we'd already accepted as certain. The pause that followed these revelations wasn't random. It's the kind of silence that makes more noise than any scandal. If you felt this sand slipping too, then you know there's something here we can't ignore. And that's why, in the next step, the question changes. From who is Julia Wendell to something much harder to face. Why didn't we ever want to listen? It was as if the story was trying to tell itself. Julia Wendell, discredited from day one, was no longer just a voice echoing in the void. She was part of something bigger, an old pattern, a cycle we insist on repeating. In every major story of disappearance, collective pain, or unanswered questions, there's always a figure who comes back to knock on the door everyone wants to keep shut. Julia became that echo, the echo of the myth of return. Like Anna Anderson, who spent decades claiming to be Anastasia Romanov, Julia brought up an unease that goes beyond herself. The fear of facing the possibility that nothing is as buried as we'd like. Anna was ridiculed, attacked, forgotten. Years later, genetic tests showed she wasn't Anastasia. But between the lie and the hope, a deeper truth remained. The world preferred to destroy an uncomfortable story than investigate it to the end. With Julia, the feeling is similar. It's not about proving an identity. It's about not wanting that threatens the comfortable narrative of a closed case. And this is where Jung's concept of the shadow comes in. The shadow is everything we'd rather not see. And precisely because of that, it comes back stronger, more unsettling. Julia isn't just a lost young woman trying to find herself. She's the mirror of our own inability to deal with what we reject. While the media laughed, While experts gave mocking interviews, the doubt grew silently, like a wisp of smoke in a locked room. And at some point, you couldn't pretend the smell wasn't there anymore. It wasn't Julia who threatened the truth. It was the silence around her. The hourglass, which until then held the sand of doubt, began to crack. First slowly, almost imperceptibly, then each fissure became a scream. The coloboma in her iris, the coinciding birthmarks, the childhood with no clear records, the DNA test with a percentage that doesn't confirm, but doesn't deny either. Each detail was a grain of sand slipping through, and the hourglass now was shattered. The time for doubt could no longer be contained. The philosophy of constructive doubt, the idea that truth doesn't fear being questioned, has never made more sense than here. Because if what we know about Madeleine McCann is solid, then why so much fear of looking at Julia without laughter? Why so much effort to bury questions along with answers? The answer is simple: because doubt is uncomfortable, because doubt demands courage. Deep down, it doesn't matter if Julia is or isn't Madeleine. What matters is that there's something in her story that rekindles a part of our humanity that was being suffocated. The ability to doubt, to seek, to not accept silence as the final answer. And that on its own is powerful. Julia Wendell, perhaps without even realizing it, broke a structure that seemed unshakable. She reminded us that mysteries don't vanish just because we close our eyes. They're still there, waiting. In the end, it's like a cracked hourglass. The sand that escaped can't go back into the glass. And the question now isn't about her, it's about us. Are we ready to accept that some truths don't get buried with a verdict? Or will we keep breaking the messenger to avoid hearing the message? Some things, once seen, can't be unseen. And even if most prefer to look the other way, those who made it this far know the time for doubt is over. Now what's left is deciding what to do with the questions that remain. You can see them there, side by side. An old photo of Madeleine, a current image of Julia. One seems frozen in time, the other weighed down by it. But when you look closely, it's not just the faces that hold you, it's the void between them. It's the question no one wants to ask out loud. What if? By now you've probably gone through all the stages: skepticism, curiosity, unease, and now maybe you're feeling what I felt when I came across all these details put together. A strange mix of doubt and discomfort, because when the pieces start to fit, even if just a few, you realize you can't pretend you didn't see anymore. Julia isn't a certainty, and maybe she never will be, but she's also not just a joke. She's someone who, with all her contradictions, touched a nerve most people preferred to keep buried. Because the Madeleine case isn't just a mystery about a disappearance, it's a mirror. One of those we avoid looking at when rushing through the dark hallway of our collective memory. The whole world wants to forget this story because it's uncomfortable, because it reminds us that we failed as a system, as media, as a society. And when Julia shows up, even without all the answers, she revives that pain. And what do we do with someone who revives pain? We silence them. We ridicule them. We erase them. But erasing doesn't solve anything. It just pushes it down. And the truth, when pushed down for too long, doesn't disappear. It festers. If you've made it this far with me, maybe you felt it too. That sense that there's something here we haven't fully understood yet, and that maybe there's still time. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I just wanted us to have, for once, the courage to see these stories through to the end. To not turn away just because it's easier. And if this made sense to you, if some part of this story tightened your chest, gave you a lump in your throat, left you unsure what to think, then you've already understood. You're already part of this search for something bigger than rumors, headlines, or quick judgments. If this story moved you, if something in it made you pause for a few seconds and think, the super chat is your way of saying, keep going. It's not just support, it's a gesture, a sign that you want stories like this to keep being told, that they matter. There are stories the world tries to erase. This is the time to show you're here. Those who send a super chat on this channel aren't just viewers, they're part of this story. Now, I want to know what this stirred in you. After everything you've heard, what part is still echoing inside you? What was the detail you can't forget? Write it in the comments. It can be just a line, but let it be real. I'll read every single one. And if you want to leave a symbolic sign, something to show you stayed until the end, comment, "Not every silence is forgetting," because it isn't. In the next video, we'll open a new door, a story even more unexpected, connecting the past to the present in a way few have noticed. If you want to see where this can take us, subscribe now. Because sometimes the answers aren't in what comes next. They're in what we finally had the courage to see now. And if you stayed with me this far, thank you, truly.